High intensity training, or HIIT for short, is something that I mention in a lot of my videos, but a lot of people don't actually know what it is. And today I'm going to be explaining the 3 core principles of high intensity training and also debunk some common misconceptions about these principles. But before I get into that, real quick, let me just introduce myself. My name is Alphonse. Here we talk about how to maximize your results from your training with as little time spent in the gym and with as little risk of injury as possible. But anyways, like I said, a lot of people don't actually know what high intensity training is, and there's also a lot of misconceptions about it. One example of a misconception about HIIT is that HIIT is a specific workout program, but this is incorrect. You might have seen, some of Mike Mentzer's old routines and read some of his, old books, or you might have read Body by Science, or you might have read the Nautilus Bulletins, and you've seen some of the recommendations or examples of HIIT routines, and you've thought that, okay, this is HIIT, you do this many exercises with this many sets, this many times a week, but that's not the case. What HIIT actually is that it's a set of principles for which to guide the design of programs and how we perform exercise. And these are the 3 principles of high intensity training, and they all have equal importance, by the way. Number 1 is that we want to exercise very intensely. Number 2 is that we want to keep our workouts relatively brief. And number 3 is that we want to work out relatively infrequently. Now, let's start with explaining the first one. We want to work out very intensely. What is intensity? There's a lot of misconceptions about what intensity actually means, and a lot of people define it differently. For example, some people say that intensity is the percentage of your 1 rep max that you use in an exercise, but that's not quite it. Another one that people say is that intensity is your perceived rate of exertion, how hard that you think that you are working, and that might be a little bit closer, but that's still not quite it. When we are talking about intensity of exercise, well, what is exercise? Exercise is stress on the body. And how do we put that stress on the body? By working our muscles harder than they are accustomed to. So exercise ultimately is hard work, and intensity is the measurement of how hard we are working relative to how hard we are capable of working at any given moment. And the easiest way to explain intensity, I would say, is by showing it as a percentage. By the way, real quick, I just want to give credit for this specific explanation to Drew Bay, because I took it from him because it's such a good explanation, so I felt that I just had to use it. You can check out his channel on YouTube. He has an awesome channel and he knows a hell of a lot about exercise, so yeah, go check him out. But anyways, the way that he explains it is that let's say that you are capable of lifting 100 units of weight in a particular exercise. That's the maximum that you can lift one time. If you then decide to lift 70 units of weights in that exercise, when you first start the exercise, this is your strength, it's at 100%, and this is the weight, 70 units. The first rep, you only require 70% of your strength to lift these 70 units of your weight, since the maximum that you can lift is 100 units. But over the course of the exercise, as your muscles become more and more fatigued, you require a increasing percentage of your decreasing strength to be able to continue to lift that weight, and eventually your muscles will become so fatigued that the maximum that you can lift is also just 70 units. At that point, you will not be able to continue the exercise in strict form, and at that point you have reached what's called momentary muscular failure, maximum effort. That is intensity. It's how hard you are working relative to how hard you are capable of working. But also, the higher the intensity of exercise that we do, the less exercise we are going to be able to tolerate. We are going to be able to tolerate less volume. Now, to explain volume briefly, it's not about sets and reps, and neither is it about mechanical work. Some people say that, you multiply the amount of foot-pounds of work that you do by the amount of sets and the amount of reps that you do, but that's not right either. Simply said, volume is the amount of stress placed on the body by a particular exercise, and that stress placed on the body is related to the duration of the exercise, the amount of muscle mass being worked in that exercise, and also how much effort you are putting into that exercise on average. average. And again, the higher the intensity of exercise, the less exercise you are going to be able to tolerate, because each exercise is going to be that much more stressful. And that stress accumulates, and if you have too much stress, your body will not be able to effectively recover and adapt from that stress, and at best you will stagnate and make no progress in the gym, and at worst you will get weaker, you will lose muscle size and muscle strength, you will overtrain. You would be better off by training harder and doing less. You train as hard as you can, and then you adjust the volume accordingly. Of course, you still want to include enough exercises in your program, not in every workout, but in your program, so that you are effectively working all of the major muscle groups in your body. But again, you want to be cautious with how much you are doing, since doing too much exercise can be counterproductive, like I explained earlier. And this brings me to the second principle, which is that we want to keep our workouts relatively brief. We don't want to do a bunch of, a huge amount of different exercises and sets and shit, and just do a bunch of unnecessary volume. And if your set is performed properly to momentary muscular failure, all that you are going to need is one set to, well, momentary muscular failure. And I have an entire video talking about why this is, which I'm going to link down in the description. And so I'm not going to get into that here. And so let's move on to the third principle, which is we want to work out relatively infrequently. It is also important that we allow our bodies enough time in between our workouts so that it's able to recover and adapt from those stresses that we placed on our body with our workouts, and so it's able to produce those improvements in muscle size and muscle strength that we want. And if we don't give our bodies enough time in between our workouts to be able to fully recover and adapt from those stresses, the same thing as when you do too much exercise at once can happen, which is that you at best stagnate and make no progress, or at worst you lose muscle size and muscle strength because you overtrain. And so this is why we want to train relatively infrequently. So those are the three core principles of high intensity training. And these are all very broad principles and also very flexible principles. All of these things like volume of exercise and frequency can be adjusted and should be adjusted to fit the needs of the individual. The only thing that we pretty much always want to keep consistent in our workouts is, of course, that intensity. But anyways, that was all for this video. That was the principles of high intensity training. I hope you learned something and that you now understand better, if you didn't understand before, what high intensity training actually is. And if you felt like you learned anything from this video at all, then please don't forget to leave at least a like on this video. And if you want to see more videos like this in the future, don't forget to click that subscribe and ring that notification bell so you can be notified the next time I upload. But with that being said, like always, I'll see you guys in the next video next time. Peace.